how to do a gentle pieced curved background. And that looks like this. So this is pieced. It is not appliqued on. I'm going to walk you through how to mark it, cut it, sew it, and then some tips on how to make sure it lays nice and flat for you. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that. And then we're going to show you quickly how to assemble your pieces and put your block together. So stay tuned. All right, so first step is to make our background. We need to end up with a 12.5-inch square to put our appliques on. So when I do these curvy backgrounds, and you'll see them in a lot of our applique patterns, I use them to give you a ground line because it's a little softer and easier on your eyes than to see a straight line across. Straight line is easier to sew because you just sew one to the other and you end up with a finished seam that you don't have to applique. Now, you could put fusible web on the back of this, draw your curve, cut it, and iron it on here, and then you have to finish that edge. But what that does is it creates an uneven background to put your applique shapes on. So, I learned this trick from Maple Island quilts when I was first starting to quilt, so I cannot take credit for coming up with it, but I do use it all the time. I have a 9.5 by 13.5 inch background and a 7.5 by 13.5 inch background. You want to make everything bigger. We're going to cut, first draw, then cut, then sew our curve, and then when we end up with the two pieces sewn together, we will then square it up to 12.5 inches. It just gives you some insurance. It's a little extra fabric that guarantees that even if your curves when you sew them don't match up end to end, you're going to square it up so it doesn't matter. Anyway, we want to make this quick and easy. So the first thing you do is you overlap one fabric with the other about an inch, inch and a half, and that's about an inch. So we do an inch. Okay. And you take some pins, and you're going to pin along the top edge down here, and you're going to pin here on this side. I can feel where that background, the bottom one is. So I'm just pinning it, and what I'm doing is I'm creating myself a channel. Now, the more you do this, the less you need to do this pinning of the channel. But if you've never done this, make sure you do this. It helps you stay on point where you need to be and make sure your curve doesn't go off of one piece into the other. So we're going to do that. So we just do 3 6 pins. There we go. See, now I can move this. So even when I'm doing the really long ones, I will pin it so I can maneuver and move this if I need to. So now we need to draw our curve. So you can either look at the picture, which in this case is just really gentle. There's nothing sitting on top of it. So it's just an arbitrary curve, and we're going to gently draw it. Again, the more you do this, the less you have to draw. You could just go ahead and cut it. You do want to make sure that at the start of your curve and the end of your curve, you want to stay fairly straight so that when you go to align this at the sewing machine, it's a little easier to line it up. So start straight, and I'm staying between my pins, and I'm drawing a very gentle curve, and I end straight. So there you see it. So now you can either take a rotary cutter and cut it, which is what I'm going to do, or you could take scissors and cut it. So how you cut this is you start straight, and you just follow the curve. Okay, and it's not rocket science. You don't have to be 100%. And again, this is all going to go into a seam, so it doesn't matter. I would not make it any deeper of a curve than that. I've got it moved apart so you can see it. Now we can take the pins out. And now you have this piece on top. This is waist. We get rid of it. There's my bottom piece. This is my top piece, and underneath is a piece that is waist. So now these fit together just like that. So here's where I lose people. When we're ready to sew this, you flip this over, and oh no, nothing matches. It's okay. It doesn't have to. It has to match this way, and it has to be mirrored this way because we're going to sew this into that curve. So you line up your end, and I'm going to bring you over to the sewing machine, and you just sort of rock this back and forth in and out, and you'll get it sewn. So let's go over there and sew it, and then I will show you how we press it and square it up. All right, so we're over here at the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how I sew this curve that looks like the impossible curve. You start with your straight ends. Use your 1/4 inch foot, and I get my straight ends started. And then I pull the fabric gently. Again, this is bias, which helps and hinders. I just position the first 1/2 inch of it. And again, this does not have to be perfect. I'll show you how to fix it if it's not. And you just work it in a little at a time. You see how slow I'm sewing? And I'm pushing the top one in. I'm kind of holding the bottom one straight. And that's why that is as extreme of a curve as you want to sew. And you just keep going. Again, this is the one thing we do get a few calls on, because people will cut it and look at it and go, I don't see how that goes together. And you see right here how it pops together. And the beauty of this is it's a gentle curve. And when you finish this and I press it, if it's not aligned right, it will crease where it needs to be sewn. And I'm going to try to see if I can create one of those to show you it. But you see how slow I am. And now you're going to see at the end, no matter how many times I do these. There we go. There's my curve. But you'll see it doesn't match up at the end. And that's okay. That's why we cut this bigger, so we can square it down or square it up to the size we want. We sew it bigger so we can square it up to the correct size. So now that we have this ready to go, I'm going to take it back over and press it and show you how we press this. So when you're ready to press your curve, you look at your fabric, and the curve is going to want to lay one way or the other. Usually the thicker fabric, it'll want to go towards the thinner. This one is thicker, that one is thinner. So that's the way the curve wants to go. So I press from the front, and I just take the edge of my iron, and you see my hand is kind of smoothing it out as I go. And I press it all nice and flat. Now I'm going to flip this over, and you can see if this one doesn't want to lay flat, it's kind of poofing up on me, what you can do is you can press down a little bit. And what that will do when I flip this open is it will create a creased line. And that creased line, when I go back over and sew on that line, it's telling me that's really where that fabric wants to be. So my seam is about a 32nd of an inch down. It's not usually this fussy, but you can kind of see the crease, I think, on the camera, I hope. But the crease line goes like this, and my sewing goes up like that. So once I straighten that out and press it again, that air bubble that you see here will lay flat. So let the fabric tell you how it wants to go for a curve. This is very different from our normal sewing. So here from the front, you can see there's a shadow there. You can see it's almost an 1/8 of an inch off. So I would take this back over to the sewing machine. I'll sew my 1/8 inch. So now you can see here, this was my first line. Then I pressed it, and that's the second line. That's the line that the fabric is like, ooh, that's really where I want to go. And now when I open this up and I iron it, it will lay nice and flat for me. So then once I have all of that done, then you can go ahead and trim this up to 12.5 inch square to get our background. It helps if you have a 12.5 inch square ruler, which I happen to have, and you look at the picture, the top is wider than the bottom. You could get fancy and measure it and say, okay, this is 7 and this is 5, which is about what I think it is. But again, it's organic. It doesn't have to match my picture exactly. So we're going to get rid of that. We're going to take this. We're going to go ahead and square this up. And this is why a 12.5 inch ruler is really handy. I have all kinds of square rulers, but if you just had a regular ruler, you could just measure and mark it and then trim it with a straight ruler. And there we go. There is our 12.5-inch square background. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.